Emily Krichbaum.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to the Carrie Croft Show.
Thank you.
I'm very excited about this.
I'm so excited to be here.
You know, we kind of tried and then we tried again. I was like, I got to get this queen in the seat.
You got to get this queen and not forget that I was supposed to be in the seat.
It's actually you guys. It's not just you. It's you in the almost
The potato?
in the bun in the oven.
The Cheeto puff.
I love it. So Emily, you have been a trainer at SOS for how long?
Since 17. So 7 years.
And that's just one facet of your just, dynamic and colorful life and personality. And like I was saying before we started rolling, I feel like with you, I needed hardly any prep because you just have, first of all, you're brilliant. And your personality is just a shining fucking star. And I'm excited for people. I some people know you from SOS, obviously, but I know there's a whole other contingent of people who are seeing you for the first time. Like, who is this Emily woman you speak of? And then by the end of this, they are going to walk away with, wow, that's Emily.
Or, wow.
Well, either way, right?
Either way, there will be a wow.
You have a flavor, but you have an authentic flavor.
Thank you. It's taken me a while to get this flavor.
Let's tee this up. It's an overview of you professionally to give people an idea of the kind of cerebral, intellectual vixen that you are.
Let me put my tweed blazer on and my mahogany, bound books. So I have my PhD in women's history. I was a history professor for 10 years. I started an initiative called Remember the Ladies, which worked to incorporate more women's history into American history classrooms. And I'm currently the director of the Center for Girls and Young Women's Leadership at an all-girls school in Columbus, where I essentially teach young women how to lead themselves and so that they can lead others. And so that could be programming, could be developing curriculum, and essentially telling them to stop apologizing and teaching them how to feel comfortable in their own skin and being a little bit vulnerable with them. And when they look at me and they're like, wow, she's got her shit together. I'm like, no. So I pull back the curtain sometimes. But I also try and expose them to just incredibly badass women and make them realize that they breathe and they, walk and they have quirks too, and that they can be them. I think I'm just trying to make up for all the mistakes that I made in my 20s, right? And put them on an accelerated path so that they don't have to try and fit in or, just apologize their way to a promotion or sorry, I'm finally acknowledging my worth, but could I have a raise as well?
Sorry, I'm taking space here.
I'm sorry, this oxygen. Yeah. So that's what I do.
And it's pretty amazing, right?
Thanks.
And you did a TED Talk. Let's talk about that. So go ahead and flex. Give me a little flex.
Thank you.
That is, and I listened to it again this morning just to kind of sharpen my pencil. And, you basically, it's what you just said, and it's the one thing out of all of it that I loved the most is you can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
And that goes for, a lot of different things, but we're talking specifically about women right now. But yeah, you really can't become something that you don't, you could, but your odds are so much higher if you see something and there's a path there, or wow, they did that. And if you don't see it, you can't be it.
Right. And I think there's so many initiatives and efforts when young women and women are in their 20s and 30s, the lean-ins, the salary negotiation workshops, and yet what are we doing for 5, 6, 7-year-old girls when they're in a classroom and the only examples of leadership or of history makers or changers they see are men, right? And so I don't think that we would have to work as hard later on if we were able to intervene sooner and tell them stories about women who did change the course of American history. So it's not like they weren't there. I was at a wedding once. That wasn't the bad part. I mean, it wasn't the best, but I was sitting beside this person and it was the best friend of the groom. So I had to at least be kind somewhat. And, we got on this topic somehow because my husband's very sweet and he always is like, Emily, tell him the things you do. He kind of flexes and it's very kind. And I could tell that this guy was not going to eat this up with a spoon, but I'm like, okay. So I gave him my shtick and he was like, I said something along the lines of, that 0.005% of written history is about women, right? Like you drop those bombs and you wait for people to be like, no shit. And he was like, okay, so what percentage of history is supposed to be about women? Like how many is enough? Like how many of these people do we need to have? And he's like, but they weren't there, right? And I think that's what people assume is that they just weren't there. Like we're not writing about them because they didn't do anything because they couldn't do anything. And that's just not the case. So I'm trying to.
Who's the one you were talking about at the end of your TED Talk?
Oh yeah, Mom Bet.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Freeman. Yeah.
She was doing shit.
She was doing a lot. I mean, for crying out loud, when the Declaration of Independence was adopted, we decided to start a new country. Quick little AP government lesson. When you have a new constitution, you need to have new state constitutions. So Massachusetts is like, all right, we'll make ours. And they were one of the first. They were overachievers. And back in the day, when you had documents like that, you read them out in the town square. And so in the town square, they're like, all men are created equal. And Mom Bet's walking. She's an enslaved Black woman. She's walking across the town square. She hears all men are created free, emphasis on free, underline, bold face, etc., free and equal. And she's like, well, I'm not. And she takes her master to court and she wins. And it's after she wins that there are all of these cases that follow, these freedom suits that follow, saying, well, yeah, I should be free too. This is bananas. It's a whole fruit salad. I mean, there are other things, like there are whatever you want to call it. Like this is nuts. All the food. I guess I'm getting hungry, 8.5 months pregnant. And so it's because of this Black woman who hears this contradiction in what the United States government is saying and her lived experience. And she calls it out and takes her master to court and she wins her freedom and she changes her name to Elizabeth Freeman. So really boring wedding guests that I was sitting beside. It's not that these things did not happen. It's just that we're not putting a microphone to those that did make it happen because we're just not seeing it because we're just not trying hard enough.
And I mean, that's so good in so many ways. But so thinking about you in child form back in the day, right? Yeah. Help walk us through, like, how did your upbringing inform kind of like what you're doing today and why you're so passionate about this topic?
I don't think it did.
It didn't.
Like at all. But I think that's why. So let me back up. So I grew up in a really small rural town and had an absolutely fantastic father who was just very by the book and very, like, you just be kind. But I think that being kind also meant knowing your space and your place and just being incredibly polite, right? Like that Midwestern, like, we will destroy you with kindness and I'm going to talk to you in the grocery store line, whether you want it or not. Like I will make eye contact with you and I will make small talk and we will reference the weather, But as a female, and especially being a female in a small town where I didn't see women who were professionals, who were career women, who were killing it, who were doing all of the things. I saw, like that the ultimate prize and trophy was like the men find you attractive, right? And you're like quarterback, high school, that whole, like the sitcoms of the 90s, I guess, right? And so I remember when I was in grad school, one of my advisors said to me that I was well-bred, right? Like in response to an email that I sent him about how, I don't know, I guess I just was polite. I was just incredibly polite and I didn't ask for too much and I wasn't too pushy. Like I was a good girl, right? Like I was just always a really good girl. And I figured out, or I thought that if I played by the rules and I minded my place and I apologized for breathing, right? And I just didn't take up too much space, that like things would work out really well. And I think one of the things that really helped me, I have a half sister who's 19 years older than me. And one of the first times that I left Ohio was to go to her law school graduation in Georgetown. And I guess my dad had went to work and he was like, I got to take time off. He worked at General Motors. He was a common laborer. And he's like, I need to take some time off. My kid's graduating. He was never he was always very humble, but I also don't think he got it because he never went to college. And his boss is like, oh, where's she graduating from? He's like, Georgetown Law. He's like, Jim, that's a big deal. He's like, oh. So we go to her graduation. He's like, Jen, this is a big deal. And she's like, thanks, Dad. But anyway, so we get there, and I remember he took me to the bookstore, and he's like, you can get one souvenir. So I was like going to get a T-shirt or something. And I was 6 or 7 at the time, and I saw Roald Dahl's Matilda, right? And so I buy that and a highlighter, and I'm sitting at the graduation ceremony. I'm like, you fools are watching this, and I'm going to study, right? Like I'm going to get there, right? So I think Jennifer and that experience was the first time that I was exposed to anything outside of this small rural America. And I knew that I had the capacity to do those things. And yet when I went to grad school, and I married very young, that's a side note, when I went to grad school and I played the game, and I played it really, really well. And then I got a job, and I started teaching undergrad, and I was really, really good at it. And yet I wasn't rewarded for it. In fact, I was taken advantage for it because they believed that the kind, polite woman would just sit there in a department of 15, and I was the only female, and they were all about 15 years my senior, and so that things could be said and things could be done, and I would just kind of bear it because that's what I thought I was supposed to do until I proved myself, right? So I think it was more of the fact that I didn't necessarily have this trailblazing feminist anything, and thought, oh, all those other people that talk like that, they're just kind of crazy. Like things just didn't work out for them and they're upset. Or I made these excuses until I realized no, this is real.
So when you got married the first time,
Yeah.
you're marrying into the same environment where you were just basically, polite and very straight and narrow sparrow.
I mean, I'm still pretty polite.
Walk through that relationship and then what happened?
Yeah. So I think ultimately, and this was the majority of my 20s, right? And I thought, again, I found another formula. The formula before was how to be a good girl, and the formula now is how to be the perfect wife, right? I make a mean pie and meatloaf. I knew how to make a meatloaf before I knew how to make a margarita, right? The first time I went to a bar, I was 27 years old. And it was for a National Endowment for the Humanities grant where we were exploring the South, and we met civil rights veterans. I mean, it was a really impactful experience, right? But of course we end in Memphis because that's where King was assassinated. And all of these professors on the bus, we go by Beale Street, and they're like, oh, Beale Street. And I'm Kimmy Schmidt-Molbum, what? By what is Beale Street? And they all turn to me, and they're like, well, it's the bar, da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, I've never been to a bar before.
Unbelievable.
Right?
Had you ever even drank anything?
No, in high school I did. I pretended to drink. I drank some and then poured the 40 ounce behind me because it really tasted terrible, right? But I just so desperately wanted to fit. But then when I met my then first partner, they were just straight and narrow. They were just crazy straight and narrow. So I'm like, I am straight and narrow. I will chameleon and camouflage whatever I need to be loved, right? I just kind of fit into that. And so you have these professors, and I think it was the weekend that B.B. King passed. So it was a real celebration, kind of jubilee of him. And so, yeah, the first time I went to a bar, I was on Beale Street, and everything was just, so to answer your question of how it all ended, I think going to graduate school at Case Western and getting the education that I did, I was able to finally think for myself. I mean, there's that whole frontal lobe development thing, right? Because I married at 20, right? I mean, I was engaged at 19. I was so young. I mean, like some of my students, I'm like, you precious little things, like Billy Madison, where it's like, I can't wait to get to high school. You know, it's like, no, like, I can't wait to get married. It's like, no. That's not the end goal, right? I mean, it can be, but that's not it. So I think that being able to teach, being able to get my education, and just to realize that there was a world outside of my world, because I had met someone in high school and I had stayed in the same zip code for my entire life. And so all I knew was what I knew. And I think, there are a lot of people that you come in contact with in this life who are in a similar boat and just don't realize that there's a bigger world. They're not terrible humans. They're not simple-minded humans. They just don't know. They just haven't had that kind of exposure.
So I want to go back to something real quick before we move forward with that. So when you say anything I could do to figure out like how to be loved.
Yeah.
Right. So does that, like, did something in your childhood inform that? So like, did you feel like you had to act a certain way or be a certain way for your parents to love you?
So my parents divorced when I was third or fourth grade. And my mother struggles significantly with bipolar disorder, severely. And so I just never knew which version I was going to get. And so, my dad is just he's just a solid rock, right? He's super stable, but I know that he was keeping it together for the sake of me. So it's like I wanted to perform for him. So he knew I was okay. So I didn't add any more stress to him because he raised me, right? And he was working the job he never wanted to work so that he could provide for me, right? And and get me those R.L. Stine Goosebumps books, because I was still a nerd, and with, my mother, it was like, well, I'm just clearly not doing this right if she's responding this way or acting this way or talking about her own daughter this way. And so I think it was just thinking that I could outperform the circumstances. And so maybe that's a little bit of a control freak thing, like a type A, like if only I do this, then this outcome will happen, right? Or if only I behave this way in a marriage, then it will automatically equal happiness. Or if only, and I think or if I get every award at the university and this, I'll automatically get tenured, because that's what happens. And that's just not always what happens.
Isn't it amazing as a child, like just based on happenstance, like where you end up and the parents you end up with, like you're so everything about you becomes like because of something like this bipolar, like you don't even know what it is. You just know she's acting different. And then all of a sudden your personality is formed and melded based on this one human being. And you don't even really understand what it is.
Right.
It's crazy to me. And did you know, when did you finally know, okay, mom has bipolar disorder. This is why she acts this way. Did you ever figure out, when you were younger, okay, wait, this is actually a mental thing? Or did you, how long did you think it was kind of you?
6 months ago. No, it was actually, it was probably sometime in my mid-20s when she was officially diagnosed. But I don't talk to her anymore. And it's been maybe 5 or 6 years. And I think that's been the healthiest decision that I've ever made. And so I actually, shout out to my hubs, I don't think it was until I'm in the happiest and healthiest relationship that I've ever been in with him that he was able to be a voice and an advocate for me, because I think I had just gotten so used to dealing with it. And learning how to live with it and being the frog in the boiling pot. And probably the same reason why I left teaching at the university, because he could see things that I could no longer see. And he could say, you don't deserve this. You're worth more than this. Your value is not in this. And to have somebody have my back like that, because I think for as much of a gem as my dad was, he just kind of avoided conflict. You know what I mean? He just wanted to avoid it to the point where maybe he created it, right? And I think the majority of people in my life were just that Midwestern nice where we just don't talk about it, right? It's the June Cleaver 1950s where it's just as long as you put those pearls on, everything's fine. And I think it was the first time that I felt like there was somebody who was willing to get messy with me and just like, I'll help you unpack your shit.
And, you know, it's very challenging to have anyone in your life that you have to create boundaries with or exclude them from your life. But having it be the person that brought you into the world is like there's a whole thing there.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, it's your mom. Oh, it's your dad. Oh, it's your brother. You know, but because I've dealt with my own set of, you know, familial circumstances. And I believe that, you know, sometimes those hard decisions can be the most freeing.
Totally.
But like when you finally are like, yep, I'm done. I'm not talking to, I mean, that's a brave, courageous decision. It really is.
I don't know. I mean, it is. But I think that when people say that, they also say that because they have their own idea of what the relationship was. True. So for example, you know, I had spent years grieving the fact that I didn't really have a mother figure, right? Like I had already kind of went through that and known that the happiest days of my life would be tainted by fear of her trying to blow it up, for example. And so when I finally severed things, it was actually like severing, I didn't lose anything positive from it. There was nothing to be gained from continuing the relationship. And in a way, I felt I'm so thankful now, having a 2-year-old and, you know, this one coming out, hopefully not right at this moment, that I feel that I've provided the space of protection. Because I don't think that there was anything good to save. And I don't mean that as like everybody collectively cry for me. Like, I think it was just this moment of clarity of this is no longer healthy. This isn't serving anyone.
I feel you really, really big on the mourning, the loss of something already. Mm-hmm. I have that sort of same thing. And I agree with you. Like when you hear, oh, it's your mom, or oh, most people identify their relationship and, oh my God, that would be so. But when you deal with toxicity, when you deal with things that are really weighing you down, like, and you look at it like, where's the positive versus the negative? It feels freeing. It feels like the right thing to do. And it's wild.
Totally. And I'm thankful that I've had numerous people in my life who have been like a mom, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
did not
Yeah.
give birth, but there are these people that I can look to that
Amen to that.
have just been an example to me so that I know how to treat June, my daughter.
Yeah.
So that I know how to love her.
Yeah.
Or, you know, negative results. I'm like, I'm just going to do the opposite. It's like the summer of George, right? Like everything that you had experienced.
I think also becoming a mother changes you so much to where this happened to me, where it's like, oh, hell no. Like hell hath no fury. Like someone trying to create a negative space for, you know, they're going to have their struggles and they're going to have but I'll be damned if it's, you know, you become the chain or you break the chain on certain things. I think being a mom definitely changes, you know, makes things easier to say.
I think in part because as women, it's so much easier to be an advocate for someone else than for yourself, right? And it doesn't feel as selfish, right?
Back to the whole being polite.
Back to the whole
Shrinking
right.
like a little violet.
Exactly. It's so funny because so many of the things I say to my students, like they'll throw back at me and I'm like, oh, I got to do that. I got to do that too. They're great reminders. But yeah, I think with June and with this one, it's just really exciting to, my husband will say, you know, talk to the belly and be like, you've hit the jackpot. You know, you've hit the mom jackpot. And there's just not a better compliment, right? Because it's just, we're really trying, as we like to say, we're not going to make the mistakes our parents say, we're going to make different mistakes.
Well, this is true. I mean, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
No, you're right. You're right about that.
But yeah, it's, it was the healthiest decision I ever made.
Before we move on from your mom, does she ever try to reach out?
Not that I'm aware of. So initially maybe once or twice, but it was more of a, why did you do this? Like accusatory as opposed to how can we reconcile? which only provided even more evidence of like, this isn't meant,
Yeah. Okay. But going back to, you go to graduate school, you decide to think for yourself, and now all of a sudden this sort of, not a different Emily emerges, but sort of like a more enlightened.
Actually, Emily emerges.
Okay. So
right?
Yes. Okay. So then, here you are, this relationship is not going to work out. Right. And you started to walk through the world a little bit differently, taking up a little more space and not apologizing so much. And how good did that feel?
It was actually a lot harder, in the sense that, what's the quote where it's like, you do what you can with what you have until you know more and you can do better, right? Maya Angelou or Toni Morrison or somebody much wiser than I am. And when I decided that who I was okay, right? And I actually was kind of proud of who I am and gaining the self-love and confidence, the life that I was living wasn't serving me. And I was living in a community where it's not about you. It's about other people. It's about serving a higher power. It's about, right? And all of that is fine and good. And there's nothing wrong with that. But this idea of being able to have any agency or self-interest or autonomy was basically sinful. And so deciding to leave that environment, it was hard because it was alienating. I lost. Correct. Yeah. Friends and, his family and Kimmy Schmidt moved to the big city. Right. and I think, so it was this, anything new is oftentimes uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. And I think for those first few months, maybe even first few years, it felt really wrong, because I didn't know, I living on my own, for example. I went straight from my father's house, right, to my husband's house. And while I had gotten my PhD and was a professor and had run the Boston Marathon and had published articles in these journals that nobody reads, and in this apartment in German Village, I didn't know how to hang a picture frame or do taxes or basically parallel park, because you never had to there was so much room where I came from. You never had to parallel park. What? I don't know. And, just, it was all wild, but I think it was those moments that made me realize who I am and how much stronger I really am. And it was a slow kind of coming into process. And then, of course, I had that eat, pray, love moment where I'm going to go to Bali and become a yoga instructor.
Did that.
Did you do that? I did that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Bali was amazing.
It
was amazing.
I didn't find Javier Bardem in Bali. No. I will say that one of the best things that came from that, besides being a yoga instructor and being able to go to SOS, is somebody took this picture of me. Then I'm like, who is that? I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. And that's what made my guy swipe.
So he saw this yoga thing?
You got this red bikini, and then you juxtapose it with PhD and professor, and I think it's kind of confusing.
Oh, yeah.
Right? She knows what the Electoral College is.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And she seems to work out.
And he's like, swing.
I don't know, but it worked out.
I love that.
I'm carrying his baby.
You as baby mama.
I'm his baby mama.
So fast forward to today,
yeah.
And you're at the all girls school, which you so kindly let me come talk to these.
You were great.
These girls.
They still have their badass stickers on the laptop, which the administrators are not sure. It's fine. Everything's fine.
You knew inviting me it was going to be a little dicey, but you know what? As long as I reached one or two of those girls, and they're like, "I'm a baddie, I'm a bitch." That's right.
Yeah.
So one of the things you were telling me while I was there was some of the practical stuff that you guys are helping these girls with. And I was like, God, I think you were telling me about their retirement plan, financial, things that I look back, I remember my dad taking me to my stepmom's mom's. She lived in a little trailer or something. But I remember him sitting me down at her table and helping me balance a checkbook. It was a core memory, right? Because no one had ever shown me anything like that. Are you kidding me? And it's still whatever, I wasn't great at it. But I love that today some of these, not even just girls, anybody, boys and girls, are getting sort of this practical knowledge that you're thinking to yourself, how do we not teach kids this stuff?
And I do, obviously, everyone needs to know this, right? Not just girls. But what I will say is that research shows that when boys are taught about money when they're younger, it's oftentimes taught as how to develop wealth, right? How to think about the future, whether that be getting a car when you're 16 or compound interest, and when girls are taught about money when they're younger, it's about their role as a consumer. Don't spend money on that. Don't buy that. Don't do that. And so immediately from the jump, girls are taught about money as this negative thing, as this, and then they're not really taught much beyond that. And so then they make mistakes, maybe when they're on their own in an apartment in German Village after leaving a relationship, right? And then there's all this embarrassment and shame about it, and you don't want to talk about it, right? So I mean, it's just this, it's this thing that snowballs. I say all that to say this, is that we offer this class, it's called CFO, and it's like CFO of your own life. And it's been so great because we bring in female financial advisors. And each week it is anything from, like this past week, we dealt with debt management. And I gave him a case study about this chick, Simone. And, she's got a little bit of credit card debt. She's living in the short north, blah, blah, everything's fine, but I give them the calculator of APRs and how long it'll take to pay this off. And like she gets a venti every morning and all these things, right? And the look of horror that they have in their face, if they're like, this will take her 18 years to pay this off. And I would have just loved to have had somebody just talk to me about that. And not even, don't spend money on ventis, right? Because that's such a gendered BS thing. But instead, I think a lot of people like to lean on this. Kids these days don't know about XYZ. And I'm like, you're right, Frank, they don't, because you never taught them. Like, how are they supposed to know these things? I think a lot of parents get nervous about talking about money and sharing these things because it's like they've got to open up about maybe mistakes they've made, or, well, why don't we have what they have, or why don't, and so there is this kind of mystery around it. So a lot of what I am attempting to do is to demystify these things that seem like they're meant for other people, right? Whether it's the people at the State House or the people that do your taxes, like everyone can do these things if you want to do them, right? I want them to feel empowered to be able to do it. And it's so cool when I talk to parents and they're like, my daughter's talking about a high yield savings account and is asking me why we haven't put our money into one. And I'm like, wait, I'm like bracing myself. And he was like, thank you. It's the first time I haven't heard something about TikTok or blah, blah, blah in a while. So it's not that this is all they're interested in. But if we don't provide something else and we suggest that this is only adult shit, right? Like, of course, like treat them as adults because that is what they are. The majority of my students are so much smarter than I am.
I mean, I love it and I applaud it. And I just feel like, and I'm hoping that most schools are doing this or on the way to doing this. And the entrepreneur aspect too, the kind of like gray area that's not just a vocation, like be a doctor, be a lawyer.
The Halloween costumes. Like it's only Halloween costumes.
Yes.
Like you can be a lawyer, you can be a doctor,
Yes.
you can be a firefighter.
Yes. A lot of us lie in that gray in between area. I mean, think about all the people with all the interests and all the personalities, right? We're not going to fit into 6 different pillars that so I love the idea of it being not only okay, but like this is a thing. Like you can create your own business. You can be an entrepreneur. It's actually a legit thing.
Yes. And I think that developing an entrepreneurial mindset, that's kind of a hard word, entrepreneurial mindset, also I think takes them away from this 5-step path to perfection, or that like I have achieved, I have made it. Kind of the thing that I had done before, right? But for them, it is, okay, you get into this perfect college and you get this perfect degree and then you go to the right grad school or med school, and then it's like, and now I am of worth, right? I am of worth after I do these things. And I think the biggest lesson that we can pass along to the next generation is that they are of worth before they do anything. They are of worth because they are. because they exist, because they breathe, because they're unique creatures that people love, and they do not need to perform for love.
I mean, I could just give you a standing O for that. No wonder you did a fucking TED Talk. Jesus.
But no, I mean, and I think especially young women feel that way because they just want to be seen as good. Random thing.
Yeah, I love random things.
So I was reading this book. I was talking about perfectionism, and I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a perfectionist, but she was talking about perfectionism as, have you ever heard of a man being called a perfectionist? Like, it's actually such a gendered term, right? So it's women that are perfectionists. And when you hear the word perfectionist, you don't think of, wow, they're detail-oriented, right? They're assertive. Like, it's actually kind of negative. Like, it's a notorious
It's kind of
term.
stick up your ass, kind of like...
Neurotic.
Yeah.
Right? And so this author was saying, she was a psychologist or psychiatrist at Google and wrote this book. And she said that if you look at the female perfectionists that are accepted, it's almost entirely in the domestic realm. Like Marie Kondo, she's great. Martha Stewart, she's great. C-suite executive, she's a bitch, right? I don't know. That's just, I don't know what made me think of that.
We could talk for days on that whole topic, but it is such a double standard on all of that. It's crazy to me.
So I try to tell my students when other teachers like, she's a perfectionist, I want to be like, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
As long as she's not defining her worth based off of her results, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be the best in X, Y, or Z.
And being organized and being,
being on top
taking
of
care of
things.
shit.
Right, exactly. No. But as long as you don't associate that with like, and only if I'm this, will I be accepted.
Now, with your daughter now, do you ever worry that you're like, okay,
I've read too much research.
Well, but here's the thing.
I'm paralyzed.
Matters of the heart, though, we can read all we want, right?
Yeah.
You also worry, or maybe you don't, but like what you've seen and what you haven't seen, how you were molded. Do you ever worry like how you're going to be like as they get older and whatever? Because I know I do that all the time.
Yeah. So this is the most recent thing. My girl, I joke around like, this is my feral daughter, right? Because she will not allow me to do anything with her hair. No ponytails, no. And I don't need ponytails. Like, it can be long, it can be kind of mullet, Joe Dirtish right now. She's a toddler. But when she gets up and it's going one way and it's going another way, it just looks like she was in a cyclone, then I'm like, we should just look well kept. And then I have this internal monologue that I'm like, that'll say, but does appearance matter? Is that her worth? Is this just simply a reflection on how you're mothering her and you're just worried about the daughter at daycare who has 12 bows in her hair? And I'm like, well, we're never going to be that. Like, we don't do tea parties. So I think there's always this internal dialogue and questioning of everything you're doing because you care, right? And if you didn't care, you wouldn't have those things. But I think the thing that I always rest on is, does she feel loved, right? Is she excited to see me? But I mean, that can go wrong too, right? Because I'm not about pleasing you. I'm not going to be your best friend, But if I could wave a magic wand, I would want her to be proud of the intelligent human that she is and to have her shoulders back, right? Like, if she can just be who she truly is, like in the most authentic way, and not feel like she needs to become a part of this monolithic blob that is teenage popularity, right? Like, if she wants to play the tuba, like, that's amazing. I don't know why I just voiced fucking, like, I can't say that word on your show. Like, if I can't.
Everything about this interview is, I love it.
If I can't say it here, where can I say it? So no, I don't. I just think, if you just lead with intensity of love, right? That like everything else is just.
And I'm sure there's many gifts you will give your kids because you're just an amazing human. But hearing you talk today, I'm like, man, your husband's right about how lucky they are, because I think one thing you're going to give them is what you yearn for. And like you are so dialed into that they're going to have that so young. And that just gives me all the feels. I think that's.
Thanks. I mean, it's being a geriatric mother.
Oh
and
God.
having had time.
Kimmy Vierhoff and I, man, we've been talking about this on the show. Like, they need a new fucking name for it.
What's wrong with having a mortgage and good health insurance?
Can someone have a new name for that though? Like, call it something else.
Call it something else.
Anything.
But I think you're exactly right, because I never really grew up with, like, I have 3 older half sisters who are 20 years older than me. My younger sister, mentally and physically handicapped, had to be placed in a home when I was 6, right? So not really having a mom, I'm not like, everybody get out your Kleenex, but just like, this is what it was, that I think I've always, and maybe my studies of history have helped with this. Like, it's always about just perspective, right? And just knowing that if we can just be a house of love, like, that's all that really matters. Yesterday apparently was Red Cup Day. I didn't know this. I went to Starbucks because it was a Thursday and I wanted chai, and I'm standing there and like, after 45 minutes, and everybody is just raging against the machine that is the baristas behind the counter, and they're so angry. And all I wanted to do was scream Hamas, just like in Starbucks. Like, this doesn't
matter,
man. It just doesn't.
People get so caught up in their little tiny think tank up here and what's important to them, and they don't see the bigger picture.
So I'm just thinking this perspective of, like, Brian and I have got a great thing going. Our house is full of love. He may golf a little too much, but other than that, we're pretty good.
Yeah. So I was going to conclude this interview until you said the thing about your younger sister. So we need to talk about that a little bit.
My sister's name's Michelle. She has Angelman syndrome. And Angelman syndrome, in layman's terms, because I don't know how else to explain it, your brain stops developing at 18 months. So you think of the capacity and the developmental stages of an 18-month-old. They're not really communicating, right? That's where it stopped for her, but her body continued to grow. When she was born, there were maybe, from what I remember, 100 or so cases in the world. And so we spent a lot of time when I was younger going to Ronald McDonald houses, staying there and going to various hospitals for people to just try and figure out what was going on with Michelle and why she wasn't developing in the way that she usually would. And so when she was placed, she was 6. And the reason why my parents made that really hard decision was, as she got older, she got stronger. And so we would have to literally lock her in her room at night, because if she got out, right, like, they'd just run off. We couldn't go out to eat because you just didn't know how she was going to behave, because there wasn't rationalizing with her. There wasn't reasoning with her, right? It wasn't like, Michelle, sit down, like, we're going to make a scene in Wendy's, or, whatever it was when people used to have dinner in Wendy's, right? Like, you'd actually, like, sit down.
Oh, I remember some dinners at Wendy's.
Yeah, in the sunroom. Yeah. And you're like, this is a moment.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I distinctly remember when we dropped her off, and she lived about an hour and a half away. We would leave the home and you would hear her crying from inside, right? And we'd go up there every Sunday to visit her. And maybe after 4 or 5 Sundays, she stopped crying. And I think that was maybe the first time I saw my dad tear up. Or, like, I can't even imagine. I think having kids now, it makes you realize, not only were your parents human, but the hard things that they had to have went through. And I think what also makes me look a little bit differently at my mother, of, like, even more so, how could you be like this, right? Or how could my father have made that hard decision to go through this? But to this day, if I were to go and visit her, she doesn't know who I am. Right? Like, we can't have a conversation. And so I just feel really thankful that I'm able to have a family, just, regardless of whether, we started this family late or, whatever it is, that I think I'm just always going to err on gratitude because life's really fucking hard for some people, for a lot of people, for everybody in different ways. I think if we have time,
Yeah.
one of my favorite stories about us is, I grew up and I started living life in high school, and, you're kind of self-centered and you're focused on your own things. And I'm like, she doesn't know who I am anyways. Like, you kind of rationalize why you don't go to visit her, because at the end of the day, it does nothing for her and it just messes with you, right? Because I'm sitting there thinking, okay, these workers are making how much an hour? Are they certified? Are they super, like, how much is the state really watching over it, right? Like, my mind went to weird, dark places. And it was just easier for me not to go. Maybe I was protecting myself, but my dad always went because it's like, that's my daughter, right? Like, I want to make sure she's being cared for. I want to make sure the money that we're giving is going towards her comforter and her this and her that. And so one year they started this race. It was called Race at the Rock. And it was when I was really, really big on marathon running. I was still in my previous relationship. The people that knew me then that still know me now were saying that I was running away my sadness because I was like doing like 70, 80 miles a week. Yeah. But I was fast. Anyways, so my dad says to me, hey, they're doing this fundraiser. It's called Race at the Rock. It's a 4-miler. Like, I thought maybe you'd want to run on behalf of Michelle. And I didn't. I don't like going there. Like, I remember when I was little, they would drive me there to visit her, and I would always get sick. Like, on the way there, like, I'd be in the back of the van, and you just have those memories of as a kiddo. But I'm like, yeah, I'll do this for my dad because he's great. And it was the week after I ran the Boston Marathon, so like I'm already in my head, like, I'm just gonna jog this 4-miler, right? Like, I'll show up, I'll raise a few $100, whatever. And so we're standing there, and my dad's like all proud, right? Like, my daughter's here and she's going to run and she's fast and all these things. I was maybe like, I don't know, 29. And they had a special athletes race before that. And, I didn't know that was going to happen, but they went like, I don't know, they went a 10th of a mile. I mean, some of them are in wheelchairs. Michelle doesn't even know where she is, right? She doesn't know her name. She doesn't know this is a race, like nothing, right? And my maiden name was Pfeiffer, right? And so they start the race, this arbitrary race, and we're standing there waiting, and I'm just like in my head, me going back to my Hamas comment in Starbucks. I'm like, I'm cold, and this is silly, and blah blah blah. And she wins, and like this race she doesn't even know she's a part of, and it was like the first time that I ever felt connected. Like, that we were, like, it sounds so stupid, right? Because it's running and it's not, but it's like I tried to read her books when she was little, right? When we were still together. And I tried to get her to watch The Jungle Book, though she wanted to watch Lady and the Tramp. And I'd put my hand over the VCR and she'd like literally bite me, right? Because, like, those were our fights, right? Because we couldn't communicate with one another. And I would try to get her to say my name. Like, I remember like saying, like, just say Emily. And she couldn't, she just couldn't say anything. And the fact that she won that race, like, I was in the middle of the crowd, that was waiting at the starting line. And I'm like, the Pfeiffer sisters are going to take this home, right? Like, I'm like, fuck this, like, just phoning it in. And I was just like elbowing my way, like posting up to the front. And I could barely walk normal because I just run Boston the weekend before that. And I won that race. And I mean, like, this is not an epic battle. Like, there were like 40 people, right? And it was a charity run, and it was the first year. And people are probably looking at me like, who does she think she is? And this is not important. But I'm like, the Pfeiffer sisters are taking this home, right? And like, and so I did. And, so then afterwards at the, fundraiser that's in the gym where we're all eating this like terribly baked pie from the local grocery store, and they have the awards announced. And like, I just look at my dad, and it's like, of all the things I'd ever done in my life, like nothing was more epic for him, right, than that moment. So I don't know why I said all that. I just, I think that if Michelle were able to, that she would be oh gosh, we would be so competitive with one another. You know what I mean? Like we would love each other and we would drive each other absolutely insane. And I love that idea. And I'm really thankful that I can provide that for June. You know, like it's pretty exciting to think about.
And with that, Emily, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on.
It's been just a treat and a half. And for those of you out there still following your knucklehead girl, because I'm not nearly as brilliant as this one, just follow me on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, keep moving.
That was a great closing.
I mean,
you
girl.
have that down.